Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafun, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. Okay, so my guest today is Bogosi Motshegwa, an ad man. And it feels like I said this before. I said this when I interviewed Melusi. But you feel, although you do a lot of writing, and I want to get into that, you feel very much like an advertising person. So where I like to start is, where did you grow up and what did you want to be when you grew up?
It's quite interesting for you to refer to me as the ad man. I don't feel like one these days, especially with where the industry is at. But I like that title. I grew up in Middlelands in Soweto, Zone 2 specifically. So I grew up, so it was quite interesting. So my parents never had a home of their own. So we actually stayed at my grandparents' house in Zone 2 from my maternal side. So my grandparents from my maternal side, they were very gracious. They were very, incredible. And as a man, you have to provide for your family. As a man, you have to have the home, the house, and build. So my dad wasn't there yet, but my grandfather was like, no, come, stay at this house and raise your kids. But me growing up, I thought it was our home. But then as I was growing, I realized, cousins coming over, and sometimes you're like, hey, this is my home. And it's like, no, it's our home. So yeah, that's pretty much Middlelands where I spent most of my upbringing.
And what did you want to be when you were, what did 10-year-old Bogosi want to be when you grew up? Was it something that you thought about?
Yeah, it was. But interestingly, it wasn't anything academic. So I used to play football in Middlelands. There was a park. So I used to be, believe it or not, I used to be skillful. And they used to call me 16V, Dr. Kumar. I felt like him. So even when we were playing in the streets and that's when I realized that street football and actual football, it's not two different things. So in the streets, I used to be skillful. I used to take on older guys, and they used to call me 16V, and I thought I was going to be that guy. And then when I went to, this was me growing up, and then when I went into primary, I started playing, and then I realized the football field is a lot. It takes a lot from your chest. That's when I realized the difference. But I thought I was going to play football. And then they put me in defense. That's when I realized maybe I'm not that good. Because I thought great players always were midfielders and when they put me as a defense, I was like, what's going on here? And then I ended up being the goalkeeper. So I'm short. Can you imagine when I was in primary school? So I thought I was going to play football, and then got introduced to tennis, and then I thought I was going to play tennis. And then I sort of gave up the sort of like the athletics sports dream along the way. It's interesting what gets put inside our heads when we grow up. So there was this perception that when you graduate from primary to high school, you have to act differently. And the acting different was, so how I interpreted this transition from primary to high school was that I needed to be more serious, meaning I shouldn't break a sweat. In my mind, I shouldn't be running around. Kids run around. Not.
So that's your reasoning behind dropping sports. Not sweating.
Not sweating. Yeah, I gave up sports, and it was never a thing. Yeah, I thought I was going to be in sports, actually. But then in high school, that's when I actually got introduced into advertising. So I didn't know anything about advertising. So when I got into high school, in the first term, that's when I realized, this is real. So they don't tell you at the end of each term that they're going to announce top 10 students. So I was just going about, and then first term comes and goes, and then the beginning of second term, they're like, in every grade, standard at that time, they're going to announce top 10 students. And I'm very competitive. So I never made it to to the list.
I never had that problem in life. The competitiveness.
Yeah.
About being in top 10.
Yeah.
And ironically, I have a son where my father was that person. It's like, you need to achieve. And I was just like, I'm good. Now it's weird having a son where I'm like, look, dude, I'm not looking for like 99%. But you just need to do your part and put in the work.
I know that. So in fact, I think my son is more like me. He's not academic. He loves the creative side.
So when did it switch? When did you start hit the top 10?
When did it?
When did you start hitting the top 10?
Funny enough, I never did actually. So interestingly, I was in the English class. That's where I performed the best. And the reason I performed the best was because of my teacher. She assumed because I was doing well in her class that I was doing well everywhere else. And when my name didn't come up in the top 10, she was shocked. She was like, what's going on? She assumed that it was automatic. But the reason I did well was that she paid attention to me. It felt like she was only noticing me, and she would encourage me to, so I put in more effort when it came to her subject. But every other class, it was just like whatever.
Now, there's an interesting value in teachers, right? Or the power of a teacher that makes you feel seen. And I think we all have those teachers somewhere along the line where, in different ways, because you feel seen by the teacher, and you'll find when you look back and you talk to people, like everybody felt the same way from that particular teacher. So there's a power in, especially with all the struggles that we're having in education these days. It's like there's an interesting power there.
Absolutely. And for me, education is quite an interesting thing in that for me, it feels like new age education where parents have to be active. I'm like, I have no time for this. I'm trying to make money so that you can go to school so that your teachers can teach you. And I understand the concept of having parents who participate and are active, but I never had that. My parents couldn't help it with homework. And it just made me appreciate actually even the teachers from the township. Those teachers were brilliant in how they taught us and made sure that we could comprehend the English language, particularly. Of course, you could do, Setswana or isiZulu, but majority of us never had, parents who would be like, okay, for your comprehension test, I never read with my parents, but then I appreciated those, and back then you had teachers who were much older, who were much more mature, and who sort of like were more matured in the journey of being caregivers in a way, where they knew how to treat, little kids. So they were much more nurturing. And now look at the schooling system. It's like, I have to be, I don't know. It just feels a bit weird. I'm like, what happened to those teachers?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I guess it is an interesting one because, I mean, I'm the same in that I was raised by my father. My father started a business, left academia, went into business, and had 5 children to raise. And so he was not involved in my school at all. So it was, I look at it as rather the circumstance than the ideal state. Like I think it's important that parents be part of the educating of their children. And it's about finding that balance. At the same time, for example, I don't know if I've talked about this before, but at some stage in my son's school, they were supposed to pick somebody from history. Right? Somebody they admire from history and then go and talk about them. And he's talking about Abraham Lincoln. And I'm like, what about Kwame Nkrumah? Like, which is where, like, you know, being from Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah for me that's who I grew up with as, you know, before I even understood Mandela, I had Kwame Nkrumah. And my son didn't know who he was. So I got that education from home because my father's an academic and he had all the books and I used to like reading. So my understanding of, for example, Africa and history comes from home. It doesn't come from school because at school, I went to British school. Like I did Spanish Civil War, French Revolution, World War I, World War II, American Civil War. That's what I studied at school. But at least at home, so when I look at my children now, with the school they're in, where we pay lots of money for them to go to these schools, it's important for me to have a hand on their education, because if I don't have a hand on their education, they're going to have a very kind of different view. So yeah, I mean, but it's also finding that finding that balance, because you don't know it and it's new, right?
Correct. And I suppose maybe it's about being clear about your role specifically, because it's probably not going to be stuff that he's going to be tested on, but it's stuff that would help him make discerning decisions in life, where you're giving him the context, and then at school, I suppose it's for, of course, learning, but the testing, you know, examination process gives it a different, you know, texture to it. It's like, okay, I'm being tested. I need to know this because it's going to come up in exam, versus what you give him, where it's more about life. You know, he might not be tested, but it's great information to know, you know.
And at the same time, so my son's now in I think grade 9, so second year of high school. And in the first year of high school, and we'll go back to, I want to go back to your story and your transition, and even like your relationship with Vega. Because also you come from a time when Vega, for a lot of young black people interested in the advertising, that was in its own interesting way a door that many could navigate through. So my son in grade 8 as a project, because they do a lot of project stuff. So the stuff that they do will run over like a term, and they're supposed to do stuff to it. So it's not just you write a test and then you go home.
I love that.
It was, so they had to choose between 3 cell phone companies. Choose between 3 cell phone companies. The 3 wanted them to be a brand ambassador for the cell phone company. They needed to choose one, looking at their advertising and marketing material, decide on which one, write a blog post as to why they wanted to choose that. And that was the assignment. This is at 14 years old. For creative arts and design, which are kind of compulsory, they actually the teachers combined that. So they have to put on a play. So there's characters, characterization, scripts, and then stage design, character design, color influence, all of that. And that's as 15-year-old. So it's a very different.
True.
It's a very different world from the one we went to.
Correct.
And in some instances, I mean, when they become teenagers, you'll want to help and they won't want your help. But when I look at the work that I do in the industries that I'm in, I'm better suited to understand the significance of what they're being taught. And I want to bring that back to, how did you decide, or how did you end up at Vega? And what was that, coming from Middlelands, what was that transition like to, come from the township and then you end up in this school at a particular time in I guess the country and the city's history?
I like that question. So I'll take you back to pre Vega. So it actually makes me think about my dad. I think he's a phenomenal human being. I've never said this to him, and I don't say it out loud often. But I find myself these days thinking about all the things that I thought were not good or bad. But in retrospect, he didn't do too badly, So it was interesting. It was just when we got into democracy. And then there was this whole conversation around integration, racial integration. Kids now from Soweto or different townships now being allowed to go into the so-called multiracial schools. It was during that time when my dad thought, or my parents rather, thought what would be best for me is to leave a township school and go to a multiracial school. And that's when they sent me to Orange Grove Primary. It looks different now, So I went to Orange Grove Primary, and Orange Grove was the first sort of like white schools that allowed black kids to come in. It was called a multiracial school, but then all the white kids left. It was an interesting dynamic. It's like, back home, in the neighborhood, they'll say, oh, okay, now go multiracial. Meanwhile, they're gone. It's just black kids. And we had this one white girl. She was the only white girl, so she stuck out like a sore thumb. But anyway, it was when I went there that I think the trajectory of my life started taking shape. I think it was there. Because then what it meant is that I can't go to Orange Grove Primary and then go to Supatsela High. It's like, so we had to continue with the momentum. We had to push. And then finished primary, went into Northview High. I think a similar thing happened. Between the time, I went into Orange Grove when I was meant to go into Standard 2, which is grade 4.
I did classes and forms.
Standard 1. I was supposed to go to Standard 2, and then I had to repeat. Apparently, it was because of my, grasp of the English language. They did a test. I thought I did great, but apparently I didn't. But anyway, so between the time I did my Standard 1 and Standard 5, or grade 3 to grade 7, I think things were starting to take, to be formed and shaped differently. All the white kids who were in these schools within these areas, Orange Grove, Northview, all the white kids left. So when we were doing research for high school, Northview still had the Northview sort of like equity.
Yeah.
But then everybody had left. All the white kids had left. They had gone to these Saints schools. So when I was searching for a school, I was actually looking for a school that had sports, that had all these extracurricular activities, but all of those things sort of like died. I went there, it looked different. But that's where, fast forward to when we're talking about my English teacher. So it was actually in that English class where I got to know about advertising. So I was very conscious of what I could do and the potential I had, but it never, sort of like carried through in every subject. Okay. So in the English class, I did great. And every other class, I guess I wasn't paying attention or, friends, influence. So we had periods where we had like comprehension tests, spot test. You just walk in and they give you a piece of article and they're like, okay, here's your comprehension. So the article that we read was about Michael Schumacher. I'll never forget that article. So the headline was The Walking Billboard. And he had his suit and it was branded. It had all these brands. So the comprehension test was around advertising. For the first time in my life, I got 98%. And I was like, aye, man, there must be something in this advertising thing. So that moment of doing great in advertising, so I latched onto that. I thought this was it for me. And it was interesting because it was in grade 9 instead of 7. Literally, that's the only thing I wanted to do. From then onwards, I put my focus, my research on advertising. Never wanted to do any of the other academia studies, like being a doctor, and those were quite popular. Yeah. In fact, there was this discrimination against students who did accounting, for example, versus the kids who did travel and tourism. Yeah. It was like those guys. No, it's either the naughty ones or not so smart ones. Yeah. So I fell into that group where I did tourism. I actually did tourism later on because then I dropped accounting. So for me, it felt like a difficult subject. It was like I couldn't get it. I got it, but not really. So I struggled with accounting. And they were like, the teachers like, maybe you should just do travel and tourism. So I did that. But then I did maths, I did biology, I did all these other things. So it was then post high school, I did research on where could I go for advertising. And luckily, my mom had a stokvel. So there was a guy, which meant both our parents were in the same stokvel. So when I spoke to my parents about advertising, they were like, yeah, no, John is doing the same thing. He's doing advertising. He's studying at Rosebank College. That's when I did my homework. Literally, it wasn't really an extensive or exhaustive research. Yeah. When I found...
Because I think still there's not a lot of specialist places you can go to.
There wasn't. So when I found Rosebank College, literally I applied. Luckily, my parents, maybe they didn't know much, but they were like, okay. So they paid for my tuition to study at Rosebank College. The diploma was called Diploma in Advertising Management. It was great. I had a great time there. So I did my first year. And then in my second year, that's when I lost my brother. And then it was during that time where nothing made sense. And I wanted to give up. And then this is where I suppose my dad comes in, because for me, nothing made sense. So I had this vision that I was going to be the savior of my family and my brother. So I didn't want my parents to pay for my brother's tuition. I wanted to pay for it. I wanted to buy a Mini Cooper and I wanted to fetch him in my Mini Cooper. So I saw the whole thing. And then when he passed away, it was like, doesn't matter.
All of a sudden, the thing that you'd been holding onto as a motivator was gone.
It was gone. There was nothing, like there was no point at all. And then my dad started talking to me about, this is life. These things happen. And that's where, I think I got an interesting relationship with my spirituality, or maybe / religion at the same time, where I hated, and you and I spoke about this, I hated the period of the mourning period of when somebody's lost, and just the emotion. It was so depressing. And that's when I sort of distanced myself from church and even music. So even the music, I'm like, this is so depressing. And then old people, not old, but adults who are much older, would come in and say, this is God's plan. I'm like, what? Yeah. What the F? And then I remember somebody saying, this is where now you grow up. This is where, I'm like, if this is the process of growing up, I don't want to grow up.
Somebody was saying they want to give up their subscription to Adulting. And the response was, don't you know that it's a lifetime subscription?
It is a lifetime subscription, and you just have to go through it. But anyway, so the diploma was meant to be 2 years, and it ended up being 3 years, which in itself, and this is where for me it gets tricky. This is the conundrum in my head. It's how does the tragic passing of my brother, or can it be a blessing in disguise at the same time? So I'm like, I try to switch that off. I'm like, nah, it cannot be a blessing. The real blessing is for him to be here, Or depending on how you think about you, somebody could say, well, at least you had him, it's like...
Yeah, it's a hard, like you're saying, it's a hard conversation. And often it's a hard conversation, it's an internal one. Because the hard part is being able to admit or acknowledge certain feelings that you have. So like you're saying, in inverted commas, a blessing in disguise. And then you get caught up just in the fact that thought popped into your head.
Correct.
You're not even engaging with the thing
Correct.
itself, right?
Correct.
It's just, how could I think that?
Exactly.
And then there's a internal judgment. So I lost my mother when I was 14 months. And it's a question I have had my whole life, And at some stage, I reached the point where I was like, look, it is what it is. I couldn't change it. And somebody say, yeah, but if you could change it. I'm like, if I could change it, I don't know how I'd end up. So if I go back to that one moment, and my mother died in a car accident, if I go back to that one moment and my mother's here, will I have lived the life that I've lived? Would I be the person I am today? I know this person that I am today, and I know the life that I've lived, and I'm like, I think I've turned out so far all right. Not perfect, but all right. I've done some stuff in my life.
Yeah.
Now, do I want to go, let me go backwards and change that? Because I believe that if you change one thing, there's a multiplier effect.
Correct.
There's no logic to it, but that's how I think of life. If you'd arrived 2 minutes earlier, perhaps the trajectory of our lives would have changed.
What is it called? Is it called the Mandela effect?
Multiply. But there's also a specific thing. But for me, it's just the multiply effect.
Yeah.
In terms of how, but also just, yeah.
It's
like this web. And the minute the path changes, then...
Correct.
The life and the trajectory change, and we don't know whether they're going to meet up at the end because
exactly.
we can't predict the future.
Exactly. So I for the longest time I actually struggled with that, where I would catch myself in moments of joy, and I would question that. I'd be like, so it was like, why are you laughing?
It's
why
like
are you smiling?
Feeling guilty for being happy.
Correct. For the longest time, I'd catch myself and I'd be with people and there'd be a joke and, we would all be laughing. In my head, I'm having this internal, and I'm like, why are you laughing? Your brother just died. How dare you And I had this thing of, maybe it should have been me. Why me? And also getting the backstory of how I came to be. I think before me, my parents had like 2 or 3 miscarriages. There was so I have an older brother who died like few days after he was born. And then there were like 1 or 2 other miscarriages. And then I came. And then then it was my brother. And now he's no longer here. So I'm having these, I'm like, what is the significance of me being like, what does it mean? And how long should I be here? It's like, if I'm 36, if I die in the next 2 years, was there any significance in like, it's like I'm trying to make sense of these things and there is no answer.
Exactly. There's no logical answer.
There is no logical answer, So in going back to that point about, and this is where for me it gets tricky. It's like, do I appreciate the extra year that I did? Because what happened was he died he passed away in February. And that was like the first semester. So I missed out on the first semester because I had given up. We buried him in March. April, I was like, oh, no, it's done. I'm not going back to school. There's no point because all the things that I wanted to do were for him and he's no longer here. So why bother? And then through the conversations I had with my dad, and then we decided that, okay, we'll just let the first semester go. And I spoke to the school and they said, no, you can do your second semester stuff. And then next day you can finish off your first semester, And interestingly, during that 3-year period, there was actually a lecturer. And I think he felt bad for us. He felt bad for us because I think intuitively or instinctively, or maybe through experience, he knew that the course that we were doing at Rosebank College was not going to get us any further. There was this one day where he asked us if we really wanted to do advertising. And we were like, we are here. What do you mean?
Sure. It says advertising in the diploma.
It says advertising in the diploma, and he was like, if you really, really wanted to do advertising, you should either go to Vega or AAA. That was my first introduction to Vega. Then I started doing research on Vega. I was like, oh, snap. But then when I looked at the fees, in my mind, I was like, based on the fees, where I am is where I should be.
Yeah.
There was no way my parents could afford, like 1 year tuition of Vega could pay for 2 kids to do their diplomas. That's how expensive it was. I was like, there was no way. But this thing stuck in my head. Vega. Anyways, I finish, do 3rd year. After I finish, I look for a job. Nothing. And the pressure at home, insane. So my parents like, what did you study? And because they didn't understand what I studied, they tried to hook me up with anybody and anything.
So they also can't advise you.
They can't advise.
And help guide you. So
yeah.
They're having to depend on their understanding of others.
Correct.
And what they do and how they could possibly help you.
Correct. That, and also the additional layer of just find a job. Just find something. They're also now desperate to help me. And now I'm desperate. I'm like, they paid for my fees. I have to find a job. I was getting into this desperate phase. Did interviews. All interviews felt great. But then I got to realize or learn that the qualification that I had actually had no value. Went for interviews, advertising agencies. I had this one great interview at Island Devonport. They were doing great. They had BMW, they had Investec. I think they may have had SA Tourism, I'm not sure. But they were balling. So I went there for an interview. It felt great. In fact, it was in that interview where I actually got to realize that maybe this qualification wasn't it. So they asked me, okay, great conversation. Like, okay, so where did you study? Like, oh no, I studied at Rosebank College. It's like, where's that? Like, in Braamfontein. That was a mindfuck. Rosebank College in Braamfontein.
Yeah.
That's when I knew. That's when I was like, game over. It didn't make sense to them. That's when I was like, oh snap. But anyway, fast forward, I found a job. You remember Glowcell?
Yeah.
I worked for Glowcell. So they were based in different malls. There was I don't know if Fashion World still exists, but we were put in different shops. There was a shop that I went to in Maponya Mall. Maponya Mall was still freshly, went there. I did brilliantly, you know. That's when I knew also that if I were to get into like a working environment, I'd kill it. So all I had to do, so Glowcell had their own stand or store. Inside the store, basically you just have to sell cell phones. The store that I was in, the people that worked, they didn't like selling the cell phones because they were not incentivized to sell cell phones. And it's a lot of work to go to the back room, grab a cell phone, come back, recut the thing. So they were like, they would tell customers, no, this model is not there, just finished. So I came in there, the sales. So what helped was that because they were not selling anyways, anything plus one, was a win. But I killed it. And the people that came to buy, it was so interesting for me. I thought when somebody buys a cell phone, that's it. But they would come back, repeat purchase, repeat customers. They would come back because of the service that I was giving them. I was so friendly with the old mamas, the older people. I spoke to them and I was running up and down. Maybe I should go back there. Maybe I'd lose some weight. So I was running up and down from the counter at the front to the back, because they kept them in like a safe. It wasn't really a safe. It was like a locker, a drum thing that you could lock your cell phones in. Went back in there. So people loved the service. The store loved the service. And then at the same time, but before that internship, or before that work, what happened was Vega had this initiative called Vega Imagination Lab. I don't know if you know it.
No, I don't. So
basically what they did was, which till this day, I'm like, genius. And I think it signals the importance of doing such initiatives. So there's Vega, the expensive school, but I don't think it's just expensive. The quality of education is great. So they had an initiative called Imagination Lab. So what they did is they would compress a 3-year degree into a 1-year learnership.
Okay.
So they give you like a summary of each subject: marketing, advertising, copywriting, design, critical thinking. So you literally got a taste of everything. So interestingly, there's this lady which I adore, to now. I actually reached out to her. It's like, listen, man, if you ever needed anything, just holler. So I finished Rosebank College. During that process, I was looking for a job. And then what happened was I get a call from a lady. And then she's like, so the job that I found was a gap filler until I could get into advertising.
Yeah.
So as I'm working, one day I come back from work and then she's like, hey, listen, how are you? My name is Lucy. I'm calling from Imagination Lab. She didn't even say Vega. She said Imagination Lab. It's like, okay. In fact, I remember the moment I was locking the house, the front door, to leave to go to work, and I was late. But I answered, we spoke. In my mind, I'm like, 1-year learnership or whatever that is, it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, I've got a 2-year, which was 3 years technically, diploma that nobody sees as valuable. What is a 1-year thing
going to do for me?
Yeah, I'm like, here's the genius, which this is the principle that I've held since then. The value of, even if you think you know better, but the value of hearing the other person and giving them a chance. So she was patient. Till this day, I don't even know how she got to say those words. So I dismissed her, basically. I'm like, this thing is not going to do anything for me. And then she was like, listen, Bogosi, the best thing is for you to come and see it. And then if you don't like it, then you can make the decision.
Yeah. But you can't just make a snap decision on it.
Exactly. So remembering all the pressure of finding a job, that at this point I'm thinking I need to find a better job.
Yeah.
But then she's like, you need to come do a learnership where you study. I'm like, no, I don't need to study anymore. I need to find a job. So luckily, I don't know what actually made me give this thing a chance. So it was in Braamfontein. I went there, took 2 taxis, got there. When I got inside, now you have to remember the conversation we had with our lecturer at Rosebank, who said, if you really, really want to do advertising,
you need to go
to Vega.
Yeah.
And when I got there, on the wall, it said, Vega Imagination Lab. That's when it hit me. So I was like, wait, is this the Vega? They're like, yeah, it's the Vega. This is the initiative. I was hooked. And the genius of me actually getting a call was that Vega was intended for high school leavers. So people who straight from high school, they can do this thing as a bridging course and then get into to find internships and start working. But what they had found was that students who came straight from high school didn't find value in this thing, or they didn't see the value in this thing, or they didn't take it seriously. So what then Gordon Cook and the team decided was like, maybe we should get a mix of high school leavers and students who have some sort of higher education qualification. And that's when they called students from Rosebank. So they called me. I was part of the group that they called. This is where it gets messed up for me. The reason I was in that group was because of the year that I missed. So remember, I did my first year, supposed to go to my second year. I ended up doing the third year.
So if you had, that's what we're talking about in terms of how things are connected, right?
Correct.
Because now in your mind, you're going, if I'd finished in this, if I'd done it in 2 years, so if your brother hadn't passed away, you'd done it in 2 years, you would have left after 2 years with something that doesn't have any value in the industry that you're looking to go into.
I wouldn't have received that call.
And then all of a sudden, because of that, you're not a part of the group that gets a phone call. You can drive yourself mad just trying to figure out, like, I call it serendipity. Like, I believe that, and it's taken me a long time. I always say, I am where I'm supposed to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing, no matter how hard or easy it is.
Correct.
I try to focus on that and not overthink those connections. So one of the things that's interested me or fascinated me about you, and we are jumping around a little bit. It's less about kind of your chronology and more like your thinking. Is it feels like from very early, you not only went through the studying and entered the industry and did work, but you've also documented it. And I mean, I was this morning, I was kind of going through all your writing online, and that's how I came. I think that's how we came across each other.
Correct.
At least I came across you, was stuff you'd written. Where does that come from? And when did you start doing that? Because you've been having the conversations that a lot of people have been having in their heads, but you've been writing them for a good, 7-8 years now?
Yeah, precisely. That's good.
Where did that start?
So I was at an agency where I wasn't getting an opportunity to do the work. So the person I was reporting to, they were hogging all the work. So there was a period where I was literally going to work, doing nothing, going back home, going to work, sitting at the office, playing pool. Eventually that got to me. I was like, no, man, this is not it. And then I started thinking about, so I started spending more time on the internet. And then what I realized was that there wasn't enough thought leadership within our industry. The content that I got was international, from the US, even going back to the textbooks, the examples, the case studies. But I'm like, I'm in an industry, like I'm in South Africa. So the industry exists. And then I started looking at people. I saw there were great people. I think Ivan Moroka was still CEO at TBWA. So I sort of like did a top line scan of people who I thought should be the voices of our industry. And that was not being done. Not necessarily picking at Ivan, but generally that's the person who till this day like sticks out in terms of people, you know, that are prominent, they've got experience, they've got opinions, they've got point of views, you know. So when I did the work, I was like, there's nobody actually saying, hi man, this is how this thing should be done. There was nobody. And it was actually sort of like a thing that came out of frustration, where I was like, so I'm here to do the work, but I'm not really doing the work. There'd be a brief here and there, but I was not being able to apply myself the way I wanted to. And generally, there are sort of like barriers in advertising for Black creatives or Black people to express themselves, to speak about the truth of, you know, from a marketing perspective, consumers.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us. It was one of the first articles I read of yours, and I remember thinking, are you making it harder for yourself? Because you talked about the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And I think you submitted to one of the magazines I worked at.
Yeah.
And you were honest and open about it. Being still in the industry. You know, you're not CEO where you can say things but being kind of just in the middle of things and speaking the truths.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember going, is this person shooting themselves in the foot?
You know, it takes me back to that point about the multiplier effect. What would have happened if I hadn't done that? Where would I be? But to your point, I should be where I am is where I should be, and the things that I'm doing are the things that I should be doing. So, in fact, I don't think I'm popular, but there are quite few people who know me, and they know me from those writings. And to your point, for me, I was just expressing myself based on what I was seeing. But the feedback I got, people would, inbox, DM, they'd be like, dude, this is exactly. In fact, we had this conversation yesterday. I was saying things that, to your point, that people were thinking about. So, and it actually hit me that I should actually be doing this. And then obviously there are people who don't like that. And there are people who are like, hey, you must stay away from him. Because he's going to say something and then you're with him and then people think, the two, okay, So for me, it was, I had to, because I think maybe I would have gone mental if I hadn't, and it was me expressing, and it wasn't necessarily sort of like a grand ambition or goal to try to change things. But I think I felt that it was important to talk about real issues. And, obviously there's no union here.
Sure.
But I do know there are certain corners of the industry where I'm not welcomed, where I've heard it, where people don't want me. And I'm like, but that was just an opinion, For example, I could write about one agency. Today, I would say, this is a brilliant campaign, the best work I've ever seen. Tomorrow, I'm like, hey, but this one, this is where I think they could have. So they take that bit only and they say, we don't like this guy. And
but also, I mean, I guess it's also partially, and I'd be curious with how you contend with it, because it's partially like, who are you to have an opinion? Because like you're saying, you're right, there'll be a particular campaign. And, you'll post quite an extensive thing, whether it's LinkedIn, you write, okay, this particular campaign, this is why I feel it falls short. And this is why I feel, in terms of in the future. Just like you're saying, when there's something that you like, you write about it. So,
correct.
So if I'm not part of the industry and I'm not part of this space, I'm getting a snapshot and I'm getting a cross section of this person's views. But if I'm in the industry and you're criticizing me, it's like, okay, but who's Bogosi? Like, what's Bogosi done for him to be the voice, to speak it? Do you ever think about that? Or you're just like, this is what I think, I'm going to share it?
Yeah. You remind me, there's a guy. So I ended up being a prefect. There was this guy who I think about a lot. Not a lot, but there are moments in life where I think this guy actually had it figured out. He had this thing figured out, where he was like disruptive, and obviously as a prefect, there are these rules. That's when I realized that actually we are just, teachers who are not teachers, but doing teachers' job to make sure that everybody behaves. So we would go to this guy and it's like, why are you doing this? He always had one response: why not? It's like, it would be annoying, but after post high school, I took liking to this question of why not, because then I started putting myself in his shoes and then started to interrogate, why am I trying to stop him? What are all these rules about the type of shoes that you should be wearing? He would wear different kind of school shoes, and was like, oh, it's like, hi man, you need to buy toughies. It's like, oh, we say you need to, why are you doing this? And it's like, why not? So for me, it's like, and for me, it even goes back then inside the boardroom, right? Where there are people who don't necessarily have built the credibility for themselves to have an opinion, but they do have an opinion, right? So there are people who are not heard inside boardrooms, who are not given a chance, who are not seen because they are not there, but they have very important things to say and articulate and to put different perspectives on the table. So the interesting thing about our industry is that whilst we are professionals in this thing, at the same time we are consumers. Trevor said something interesting about consumer insights, where they were working on alcohol beverage, and he was telling them about the lifestyle of people who live in townships. This is what happened on the weekend. They were having a debate. The people in the room are trying to have an intellectual debate, so like an academic debate. They're like, where's the data? Where's the proof point? And then he was like, I am the data. I am the proof point. There's nobody documenting, the lives of people in the township, but he lives it. He knows it. How do you then package that into something that is justifiable in someone's mind, to say, okay, now I get it, So for me, it's like, if you take that sort of like microcosm of being inside a boardroom, and then for me, it's like, that's an amplified mindset. If you say, who is he to have an opinion about, this work? Because for me, I like, this idea of being the consumer, being credible, firstly comes from my personal life, and then this professional layer. Because what we tend to do is we follow templates, we follow ways of doing, and most of these ideas are not ours anyways. Like, for example, if you go to Ogilvy, it's David's way of doing things. From a brand principle perspective, to say Ogilvy is a brand, that makes sense. But I think for me, I'm more a professional who tries to live in real life and tries to maintain that perspective more than trying to sound smart. But it's like, this is the reality. This is real life, you know.
Yeah.
For example, there's and not many people actually think about this. The importance of, so going back to this point, who is he to have an opinion? There's a campaign that was done by Mad Lemon. Obviously, Mad Lemon, you know, get a cough, fever, whatever. In the ad or in the campaign, they're selling a product, right? So it's me. I don't have any award. I don't have any creative award. Literally, I've done nothing, right? I see this ad where the basic storyline is you are at work, you feel feverish, you feel a cough, take Mad Lemon and you're good to go. That's a great product demonstrative ad,
sure.
Right? This is where my lived experience comes in. As a Black professional working in agency or the corporate world, understanding our background, understanding how we operate as Black people. Black people, more often than not, are afraid. To the point where we are afraid to take care of ourselves. When we are sick, we still go to work. If you understand that context, you will see the ad differently. So in the ad, they show a security guard, they show a lady who works at a call center, and then they show a guy who's like cleaning these big glass tall buildings in Johannesburg. In the ad, they become feverish, cough, whatever. And the storyline is they take Mad Lemon and they're good to carry on with their work. Knowing that I've seen friends who are sick, I've seen mothers who go onto a bus, who get onto a bus, they are sick, but they have to go to work. Why? They're afraid to lose their job.
Yeah.
They're afraid. We are afraid. Maybe coming back from or linking it back to where we come from as a country, but we are people who are afraid. And that leads into a professional life where we're afraid to ask for raise. We are afraid to even take leave. Like mandatory, these are your leave days, but you're afraid to take them, right? So I look at that ad. I'm like, okay, what is this ad perpetuating? Already, as Black people, like a Black person would be in an accident, get a cast. The minute they feel like they can walk a little bit better, they're back at work. So I look at that ad. It's a brilliant product ad. But when I look at it through the lens of my lived experience and the experience of many others, there's a problem with that ad. Because what it does is it perpetuates this idea
that when you're sick, you must still go to work.
You must still go to work.
As opposed to
take care of yourself, stay at home, go to the doctor. So then I take that ad and I write about it. I have no awards. I've got nothing. All I have is the reality of many Black people. And we call it advertising, but it is media that has influence on how we think. You know, somebody else who watches that ad, when they feel sick, they're going to take Mad Lemon and go to work regardless of, you know, the pressure that they're putting on their bodies. You know, so when I see that ad with the perspective that I have, with the context that I have, who has more credibility to say something, and what value do the awards have to not allow anybody who doesn't have one to speak on issues? So for me, I speak about those kind of things, right? Where am I going to get an award for being able to discern that kind of message, you know, or that tone? Or it's like, what is the purpose of this ad? What is it doing?
And I think it's one opinion. It's an educated opinion. It's coming from, you do have a basis to speak on, but it is also one opinion.
Correct.
And often it feels like the world has become very kind of you're against us. You're either with us or you're against us.
Correct.
Everything is black or white.
Correct.
And I don't have to, like, I've seen some of your stuff where we've talked. I don't respond in writing, but I'll be like, I'm not sure. But disagreeing with that opinion is not an indictment of
Correct.
the human being.
Correct.
And I think sometimes we forget that. Just like sometimes, I mean, you're just talking about this ad. I'm not going to talk about the bank, but I remember actually you'd written about a campaign that a bank had done and a whole kind of brand shift. And ironically, I'd been talking to the agency 2 weeks before to be involved in the campaign as an influencer.
Okay.
And I remember kind of looking at it because I try to do things that resonate with me, that make sense. So, if you're going to come with a lawnmower, I'm like, I don't mow the lawn.
Correct.
So I'm not going to do it because I need to connect it to me and my life. That's how I think about things. And I remember looking at this thing and I wasn't popular enough to be one of the people selected. But I remember looking at the thing and kind of going, it feels off. Like the campaign they're coming from.
Correct.
And the taglines they're coming from still resonated more for me than this thing.
Correct.
And then when it came out, I remember reading a piece on it and going, with you articulating from a professional, from a branding, from a strategy perspective, what it was, I just felt intuitively. And it's important to have those different voices. And sometimes it's important to have those voices in the boardroom when they're having the conversation.
Correct.
Is this what prompted you to start Thinkerneur?
So Thinkerneur started actually, it came out of Vega actually.
Okay.
Initially as a concept. So we had to do our portfolios. And then I came up with this concept of Thinkerneur. And some people say Thinkpreneur, which technically they are correct.
I struggle. I won't lie. I struggle with it. And I know I've worked on it. I always struggle to... People be like, hey, you're hosting a talk. Yeah, think, and yeah.
I love that. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if it's a good thing because it's a conversation started and we can say, no, that's not how you say it. Then I can tell the backstory. I don't know. Or I want people to get it the first time around. I don't know. But it started as a portfolio. So that was my brand in the showcasing of my portfolio. And the idea came from, because I wanted to help, this was the initial idea, right? To say, if you look at most businesses that become valuable, they're valuable because of the brand, not necessarily because of the services or the goods that they make. Fundamentally, most of these things are similar, right? So I wanted to be the person or the business that was going to help guide businesses, especially from the township, to shift from we are doing business to survive to I'm building a brand. Okay. So growing up, it never made sense for me how before the Somalians and the Pakistanis came, there was once puzzle shop and it was a family business. It became that way for 20, 30 years. For me, that never made sense. I'm like, why? And I was like, Pick and Pay and all these other retailers, they probably started like that. Maybe a bigger shop front. But fundamentally, Pick and Pay is like a big puzzle shop, So for me, it's like, we had this puzzle shop in Middlelands where it was like that forever. I remember being little, going there, and then getting old and still the same thing, the same mama, the same papa, the same. So for me, I was like, I needed to build something that's going to then help educate and help people to think more brand and less product and services. Because also in the township, there's this thing that people fear competition. It's like if you start something and then somebody comes next to you, you like, why are you here? You know, but that's just the competitive nature of business, and that's where branding comes in. I remember having a conversation with Gordon Cook where I particularly asked him about, we're talking brand building, and generally people who can afford, or basically it requires money to build a brand. And the question I had for him was, how do I then build a brand? And I love this answer. He spoke about service as a differentiator in building your brand. He made the example of, imagine if you made it your mission, your conscious mission, to know everybody who comes by their name. So even once after they've bought and they're just passing by you, you can greet them by their name and say, I hope I get it right, Kojo.
I forgot we had a whole conversation the other night about the pronunciation of my name.
I don't know if I will ever get it right. Kojo? I don't know. I'm talking to you.
Let's just keep going.
So anyway, that idea of, Kojo, how are you? How you doing? How are the kids? Did you manage to get that? I know your wife, there was a thing that she was looking for.
Yeah.
From that perspective, So I wanted to
Which is what you're doing at Glosal without recognizing it.
My man. Exactly. That's exactly what I was doing at Glosal. So that was, which is still sort of like a mission of mine, to help. That's Puzzle Shop should have been a number of, it was called Peter's Place, because the old man lived there was Prapita. Yeah, actually, exactly. Prapita, there's no reason why there shouldn't be a Prapita in every second street, So that was the intention. So meaning, Thinkerneur is thinking and entrepreneurship. So the combination of the two created Thinkerneur. But ultimately, it has sort of like evolved into this consultancy where now I'm trying to get big clients, and that also is like a whole another topic.
So it occurs to me, I introduced you as an ad man, but actually, so you are closer to me in being a media, let's say a media practitioner, because a lot of the stuff that you do, while you come from the kind of advertising space, has a strong kind of storytelling, content, and media basis to it. I mean, the things that I was hosting for you, the Thinkerneur sessions, those were sessions, and you've hosted and you've interviewed multiple people, and you're doing podcasts, and now you're back to live events. Yeah. So as we wind down, what are the things that you're doing today? Because you have a lot of stuff.
Sometimes I don't know.
What are your days like?
So my days are filled with so I've got a new role, so sort of like I suppose it's so we've gone through a phase where we've been looking sort of like for a creative head for the agency, but that never quite seemed to work out, I suppose because of our philosophy and intention, where we believe in, I suppose every agency does, but I think we're much more precious about making sure that creatives understand their strategic intent. Okay, yeah. So now I sort of like head up both departments, strategy and creative. So to make sure that once the strategy is solid, creatively, the expression does a number of things. One being able to then do the job that is intended, depending on what the objectives are, but it needs to be part of it being persuasive and being strong, that it does what it does there. But at the same time, it's not just about the creatives. There are some strategic imperatives that need to be, so sort of like, it's a dual role.
So what I've always liked about you is the focus and importance of strategy. Because in my own work, I encounter it all the time. So people say, what do you do? And I'm like, okay, I'm a writer, or I'm still struggling with this whole content.
Okay.
I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer. Like
Okay.
that's my basis. That's where I come from. But I'll tell people I develop content or editorial strategies for brands. But they'll go, oh, so you can do my social media. And it's like, but you have to kind of have a strategy. You have to have an editorial strategy in place. What are your editorial pillars? What's your positioning? What's your focus? You need to lay all of that out. Then the actual implementation is the easy part.
Correct.
And so what resonated when we started interacting was that focus on understanding that you have to start with strategy. You have to start with an idea. I mean, it can evolve. But an idea of who you are.
Correct. And that was sort of like my frustration with advertising agencies. So fundamentally, they are founded by pure creatives. I don't think I've come across an agency that was started by a strategist and is a creative agency. Strategists will either consult or have some sort of strategy consulting thing. So that means the agenda is creative output. The end product, which I suppose is fair, brands come to advertising agencies or creative agencies for a creative product. But for me, what didn't make sense, which also made me feel redundant, was the over-indexing or the overvaluing of the creative department, regardless of the individuals. But generally, there's an over-index on the creative department. So at times, it felt like I was just there not to necessarily add value, but just to make sure that whatever the creatives come up with, the client, we put something together that back rationalizes that, and then the client can buy, which is something that actually made me leave the industry, because then I felt that perhaps strategy might be taken more seriously if it came from outside. Because inside creative agencies, it's like nobody cares. So hence, I also started the platform and having the conversations. There were no strategy awards, for example, but we will have the Louis, we'll have the Cannes, Creative Lion Festival. There were all these things that emphasize the importance of creativity, but there was this huge vacuum for strategy. And what's interesting is that whilst brands come to agencies for the creative product, but clients are thinking much more, their world is much more complex than that, which is why sometimes you find that there's a disconnect between what the client wants and what the creative agency is putting forward. So I've always believed in strategy, and that's my agenda, to push, to say it is important. It should be given the credence that it deserves. It should be heard. Strategists inside agencies should be seen and be asked to contribute. And what's interesting is that internationally, they do value strategy, and there's a community of people who thought leaders who are coming up with different models. There's always something new, and I don't think we have that in our context or in our country, where there's always something new around strategy. There's always something new around data strategy, but we tend to over-index on the creative new things. Like now with, I don't know if you've seen this thing around Mid-Journey and creative AI, where literally you input descriptors. It's like, I want, I'm imagining this world where you can say Star Wars, but it's in Africa, and then
somebody was telling me about stuff like that recently.
And then it spits out, the data input, it'll pick up from different sources and it'll create this unique. So there's always technology and innovation around that. Well, at least here, we are not having those conversations.
Yeah, look, I've always questioned whether it's being a little old school or if I'm on the right path. So when we look at the media, I always tell people, media like magazine is a business model conversation. Because particularly within South Africa and within the African context, we have an emotional connection to these things. So somebody will go, we need, when magazines were still selling, but we need a magazine that speaks to black men, right? And when there's no magazine, it's like, no, you have a responsibility, you must do this thing. It's like, but yeah, there's a business model around creating a magazine. And if the world is evolving, it means that business model is evolving. People would go, yeah, just have a website. And it's like, yeah, but the revenues from a website compared to the loss of revenue from print is different. So you actually have to rejig your entire business. And I've found, and one of my frustrations has always been, like you're saying, so internationally there's conversations are happening. Nobody's getting it right because nobody's got it figured out.
Correct.
But everybody will try this thing out, and a couple of them will try it, okay, it doesn't work, and then they'll try something else. Whereas here, it's like it often feels like we're having the same conversations. And my frustration with the international conversations that they'll never be contextual. So I have to do the work of looking at it and then going, okay, this is my environment. What's unique about my environment? I mean, so I wrote a blog post and I have a newsletter, email newsletter. And I went on to what Clubhouse started, and it was popular for a whole of 5 seconds. And I went on to, it's an American guy that I've been following for years, who writes on the business of hip hop. And I actually interviewed him when I had the radio show. Like one of his things was like Beyonce's sales funnel. Okay. And he looks at all the multiple levels, from streaming services, events, but from a business perspective. And I was in this thing, and they're talking about like, newsletters now in the US. You've got people who've left jobs and they post every day on a newsletter, and you have 100 subscribers who are paying you $5 a month. That's $500. 1,000 subscribers, 10,000 subscribers. You can live easy off that.
Yeah.
But I was like, my newsletter is not subscriber based. It's not paid for. Because $5 for my people is very different for $5 for somebody sitting in the US.
Correct.
So even if you like my writing, it's down the list in terms of, okay, I've got an extra, the rate it is now, like I've got an extra 70, 80 rands. I'm going to spend it on Kojo's thing every month to hear what Kojo's thinking, compared to airtime
exactly
or tuck money for my child, etc.,
Exactly.
So there are conversations that we do need to have.
No, absolutely. In fact, I remember, Seth Godin's newsletter. Yeah. There was this one particular piece he wrote about the end of TV. It's like basically TV is going to die, or nobody watches TV. And then I responded to him. I'm like, hey, my name is, I hear you, makes absolute sense. But here's the context of where I live, where TV is pretty much huge, where, we watch TV, like TV is the thing. And I'm like, okay, what do you think about that? And then he responded, and then he was like, so he acknowledged that context. Basically, the sentiment of his response was, I get it. So maybe TV might not disappear for every region or every country or every part of the world, so I acknowledge that.
That's the challenge. The challenge that we have is that we're still heavily influenced by what's going on in the US.
Correct.
Because the system and, let's say, the knowledge base is to by and large controlled by them.
Correct.
And there's just so much from them that, and unfortunately for too long, we've just assumed that they're correct.
Correct.
With very few people actually engaging with it and kind of going, okay, yeah, cool. I mean, it's like radio.
Mm.
Radio on the continent, radio in this country, I would even argue it's bigger than TV.
Mm. Mm.
Especially local, indigenous language radio.
Mm.
Whereas if we're living in Joburg, you're looking to advertise in the English-speaking stations. And it's like, yeah, but it's only in Gauteng. Like in Gauteng, there's only a tiny portion of us. And we spend our money on X, Y, Z.
Mm.
Meanwhile, there's another 50 million or 45 million people who are not being catered for. Exactly.
Which is, going back to your question about what is it that I'm doing now, part of it is having those conversations. Sort of created the series called the Impact Series, where we have these conversations. So my agenda is you call it, being traditional. I call it that too. But the other way articulated is going back to the fundamentals, right? So for me, things might move, things might evolve. And I think this spills over to even our personal lives where, if you talk about the concept of marriage and, this discussion, and this is my interesting relationship with Twitter, where if you go onto Twitter and you see the things that trend, you would think it's the end of the world, but once you unplug, you realize you see people walking in the mall, people buying ice cream, and then it's like, so it's like having these going back to the like what is it that we're trying to do? So I feel like we get bogged down by jargon, new terms. Everybody wants to sound smart or come up with a new, but ultimately I feel like everybody's saying the same thing. Even when I compare the international, you'd have these contrarian thoughts and, views where everybody's saying the same thing, but everybody's like, no, mine is different. Even when somebody says, no, this one is different, but they will agree with everything else at the same time. I'm like, so the purpose of the Impact Series is to have conversations, to bring people, in the industry. What I've realized is that generally we will see the same people over and over, doing the talks, because they have the backing of the organizations. Yeah. The organizations are putting money behind events, whatever. But there's so many people who are brilliant, who have ideas, who have, part of the work that I'm doing with the guys is we bringing Advertising Week Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course, we bring Advertising Week Africa and we're meeting these other people. There's a gentleman who we met with. I think his name is Anita. I hope I got it right. That it'd be so bad. But I didn't know him. He took over from Nunu. He took over from Nunu. And we met with him, we spoke. I'm like, this guy, he spoke about his experience, where he's been, McKinsey, London, Unilever. I'm like, and this is something that actually one of our panelists, Naniki, made me realize about the people that I bring onto the panel. So usually, if maybe let's say you're running Kojo Radio, when I bring you on board, fundamentally we're going to talk about Kojo Radio, and then we disregard all your other experience that you come with, you know. And then she was like, listen, when I come, yes, the title is there, but don't reduce me to the title, and when I met this guy, I'm like, yo, this is the guy that I want to, because now for me it's like his perspective is like, whoa, he lives in Nigeria, he's been to London, he's been to the US, he's been literally everywhere. I'm like, this guy, yo, if he were to be on a panel and he would talk about his experience, and maybe he doesn't have any awards, right? Going back to that conversation, he doesn't have any awards, but he has this wealth of information and point of views and perspectives that we never,
But you get the premise of this experience, this podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's about that, is that we're human beings, we're not job titles, right?
Correct.
And I've always struggled to answer that question. What do I do? Right? And then fortunately being exposed and meeting people, such as yourself, and most of the people I've interviewed so far, I've had on the podcast, which is why it's a conversation, is people I know in some form or another. And because I know them, I also know that they're full of human beings as opposed to just what they do as a career. And the awards thing is funny because I still don't get it, but it's like this attention or this idea of awards. Meanwhile, you have, like you're talking about this person, there's hundreds of people or thousands of people who have not been in the, top 100 young this or, top 40 people under 40 or they haven't been on lists. But they're out there because the majority of people are just out there in the world working. They're not trying to build themselves as brands.
Correct.
They're not. It's like, look, I'm a professional. I'm trying to live my life. I'm trying to do my work. So, yeah. But on that note, my man, because we could go on forever.
I know.
Thank you very much. At some stage, I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yeah.
We didn't touch a lot on fatherhood.
That is so sad.
But I'll leave you to navigate this period. Recently, we had a very long conversation about navigating fatherhood. Yeah.
We should do 2.0. I think that's an important.
Although, just to close off, I'm curious, because you're doing all of these things. So, and a lot of what you're doing it's semi-early stages, or it's like a reignition. So from Black River to Brand Reserve to Advertising Week. And then you have a child. How are you finding that, I guess, let's say alignment rather than balance or harmony in terms of doing that?
That's actually a scary question. I don't think I have balance because currently I'm over-indexing on the work.
Okay.
Because it's early stages, it does require a lot of me. And I say scary because next year I'm going to live with him full time.
Okay.
So now I don't live with him full time. And I suppose that's what creates the room, for me to be able to then do other stuff.
Yeah.
But I have grown some sense of appreciation or acknowledging the work that predominantly is done by women, who would take care of the family and still do the...
Yeah.
Sometimes I would have him for a weekend and I'd struggle. I'd be like, hey, this boy, there's a presentation that I need to finish. And he wants me to be there.
Yeah.
Like literally he wants us to have a conversation about every single thing that happens. It's like, did you see that? And then he wants to tell me the story that we're both watching. So it does require one to be present, not just physically present, but mind, spirit, and soul to be there.
Yeah.
To acknowledge him, to speak to him, So at the moment, to be honest, I don't think I'm too bad, But what I do want is to spend as much time as possible with him. And what will be interesting is when he's with me full time, where I go to work and I come back and he's there.
Yeah.
So, but it is an interesting dynamic, and part of wanting to be with him is that's what I know. I grew up in a household of mother, father, kids. Then that's what I want. So at the core, I'm a family guy. So unfortunately, me and his mother are no longer together. So that creates like a complicated dynamic, Then we get into this conversation around blended families, and it gets tricky. If it were up to me, we'd still be together, and because that's what I know, that's what I want. But I think even outside of the nuclear family, I still want that. And he's 7 now. But with each day that passes, I feel like I'm not there. Even though it's not like I've run away or anything.
Yeah.
I'm there, but I'm not really there, and it's because of circumstance. But I feel like I want to have much more influence. I wanna speak to him. I want to understand his world. I want to understand how he thinks, without turning him into me. But I think me knowing him will make me a better parent. Because the more time I spend with him, I get to know him.
It'll also make you a better person.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I believe that.
I agree.
It's my cheesy line. Like, if we allow them, our children make us better human beings.
I agree. And he's taught me, or he's teaching me. Although it's so there's so many sort of like tension points, and one of them is what I want for him versus who he is. There's who he is, and there's what I want him to be, So I have to let the letter sort of like take a back seat and allow him to be. For example, he academically, he doesn't like school, but he doesn't like the studying, sitting down, being still, but he loves going to school. Why? He gets to play with his friends. He gets to run around. That's what he enjoys. Artistically, he's brilliant. So I've been thinking about what should I do to help him, to enhance his thing, so he can draw, like and.
Okay, so I'm gonna cut you.
Okay.
Having a 15-year-old and say this, he's 7 now.
Yeah.
So to even like to come up with how can you help him? Because when you're thinking how can you help him, you're still thinking long term.
Yes.
You're
correct.
still thinking long term.
Correct.
But he's 7 and he's evolving, and who he is at 7 won't necessarily be
who he is.
Fundamentally he will, like in terms of the character,
correct,
etc. But
I get you.
In terms of interests, so you find all of a sudden you're like, okay, no, he's an artistic person. And then in 2 years' time, he shows you flames when he's like, actually, I like physics. And you're like, what do you mean? We've done all of this stuff, and now you're talking about I like physics.
Creates a whole new dynamic.
It creates a whole new dynamic.
I get you. That's something to think about.
So what I've tried to do is I've tried to expose my children to as much as possible.
I like that.
Driven and guided by their interest. And sometimes it's expensive and sometimes it's painful. Like, I have a guitar in my house. I have a kid's guitar in my house because somebody decided they wanted to do guitar. and then a year and a half later, they're not doing guitar. And I have a guitar. Right? Basketball, football stuff, drum kit, and so my only requirement is that if you commit to something, you follow through on it. So if in January you say, I'm going to do this year, then you must finish the year.
Okay.
After that, you can leave it.
Why is that important though?
Because I also don't want a situation where you're changing every week. Like, you need to also recognize that if you're going to commit to something, if you're going to say, I want to do X, Y, Z, then you need to follow through on X, Y, Z.
Okay.
I'm not going to hold it to you for life, but there must be some period where you have made a commitment to something.
Is it a deliberate intention to teach life lessons or is it like what's the thinking? So I think in principle, I think I get it.
In the beginning, when my kids were younger, there was, I guess it was a lot more deliberate. As they get older, the more I'm just like, I'm just trying to get through today. I'm not thinking about. So it's literally just creating a foundation, and they will figure out. They'll figure out what it is that they like. They'll figure out what it is that they're going to do. My job is literally to try and help them get the tools, emotional and otherwise, to be able to tackle the world. Because they're going to live their lives.
True.
And they're going to make their choices and their decisions and their mistakes, and they're going to go down that path. It's not for me to decide what that is. It's really to kind of just give a foundation and try and guide and give insight where possible. And it sounds great when I'm telling it to you. And then I'm faced with a situation where I'm having a conversation about something and it's like, the person doesn't get it. Or they're not interested. You know, like I can be out in the world and I meet somebody and somebody will say, yeah, no, it's really cool, or thank you, like you did X, Y, Z. You know, the fact that I have a podcast, or I've had a radio show, or I wrote a book. Like my family, they're like, yeah, sharp.
Good
But
for
it's
you.
not a thing. You know, it's not a thing. It's not like my son goes around telling people, oh, my father wrote a book. You know, it's like, yeah, no. I'm just the guy who comes with discipline sometimes and doesn't let people do things. So,
You remind me of a my son was you know, the African Bank ad we did with Ricky Rick. So I was with him and then the ad plays. And then it's like, yeah, that's you, nah? And then it's like, yeah, no, you made him famous, right? I'm like, that's a dope idea, but I didn't. It's like, no, you made him famous. He's like this because of you. Like, no. But deep down, I'm like, yeah, I like that.
yeah. He's still thinking that actually all of this is because of you.
Yeah, and he's like that. And then he was like, the other day, I was like, I wanna be just like you when I grow up. I'm like, I'm not sure that's a great idea, but I like that.
No, like own it for now.
I like hearing that.
Yeah, and I've never had that. so own it. Oh man, thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure, man. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojobuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojobuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Kojo Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.